Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel. We are so excited that you've chosen to join us. My name is Marissa with ActiveNav. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Tyler.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa, and thanks for inviting all of us here to speak with your audience today. So my name is Tyler Kleykamp. I am a fellow at the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University. And prior to being in this role, I was the Chief Data Officer for the state of Connecticut. And at the Beeck Center, we work in a variety of ways to boost social impact, primarily recently through data and digital tools. And so one of our projects is working with the state chief data officers across the country. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. I'll go in order of, I see them on my screen, so we'll start with Adita from Arkansas.
Thank you, Tyler. Hello, everyone. My name is Adita Karkera, and I'm serving as the Deputy Chief Data Officer for the state of Arkansas since 2017. But I've been with state government here in Arkansas for almost 21 years, working at the intersection of business technology and data. Tyler, Rachel, Ed, it's really good to see you all today. And thank you, ActiveNav, for giving us the opportunity to come together with my peers. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Adita. And Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I'm Rachel Stone from the Utah Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Chief Data Officer here, going on 2 years. It's been a new role for this office. So we've been figuring out what we need to be and what we need to resource as we've gone. So I'm excited to share a little bit about the lessons from that. So thank you so much, ActiveNav and Tyler.
Thanks, Rachel. And we'll turn it over to Ed. Thanks for joining us on short notice, Ed.
Yeah, not a problem, Tyler. Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the discussion today. Ed Kelly, I'm the Chief Data Officer for the state of Texas. I actually had this role now for 2 years because the position was actually codified in our last legislative session. Prior to that, I was known as the statewide data coordinator back starting in 2016. So I've held this position for 5 years. Prior to that, I had government experience working at the Department of Public Safety as their CIO, and also in the Department of Agriculture as their Chief Administrative Officer. So I got a total of 16 years of public service experience and the rest in private sector experience. Again, looking very forward to the conversation, and thank you for inviting me.
Great, thanks, Ed. And this is a sort of a good segue into our first question for the panel here, kind of recognizing that the role is new and kind of varies from state to state. But in 2010, Colorado was the first state to create a chief data officer. Shortly thereafter, New York City was essentially the first city to create a CDO role. And sort of over the past decade now, I think there was a lot of movement around open data and leveraging data as an asset, both within government, from citizens. This has led to initiatives and groups like the Beeck Center, where I work, that were launched to provide resources and promote collaboration. And that's a pretty truncated version of the history of the state CDO role. But I think 10 years is, to some people, a long time, but in government, it's a very short period of time. So kind of with that in mind, at this point, we've got CDOs in half the states approximately, as well as dozens of major cities. I'll kind of start with you on this, Adita, and we'll go through the panel, but how would you describe the current role of a CDO?
Yeah, good question, Tyler. I guess I still feel like the role of the CDO, like you said, is so still very emerging, right? And especially so in the public sector, like you said, we're about 27 to 30 de facto or real CDOs across the nation. And I feel like there are no standardized job requirements or duties for a CDO. I mean, there's been some academic research done on this as well, but I feel like a CDO should definitely have a mix of data, business, and some IT skills, right? I mean, just having the technology skills is not sufficient because the CDO's role, I feel, is like to bridge that gap between IT and operations and kind of start using and adding value on leveraging data, right? So in my mind, I guess a CDO is a coordinator, I guess, a strategist, a technologist, change leader, communicator. I mean, I can go on, but maybe it will help if I share a little bit more about my specific role here, and that might kind of shed some more light on how other state CDOs roles might align. And I feel like my role here is to sort of harness and leverage data to turn it into more actionable intelligence so that we can actually start using that data to drive changes that impact citizens' lives directly, right? So I work with state departments together to collaboratively create data policies, standards, and procedures with the eventual hope that we are improving data governance and data management for the state as a whole. And one thing, I guess, for me that has been important is that I like to think of the state CDO as not just sitting in its own silo here. We've taken a very federated approach here to say, you know, we have the state CDO, but we are also working very closely with each department and each agency. So what we've done here is we've created or identified agency data officers in each of our different agencies. And so these are called agency data officers in different agencies and departments. And then we've gotten these agency data officers to come together to create our state data governance steering committee. So kind of just to give you an idea that the whole point is that we have a very federated approach to all of our data initiatives, and that the CDO office is not just working alone in its own little silo, but we're actually creating that movement and building that culture around state departments. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'd love to kind of hear from Ed, because you talked about the coordination aspect, and Ed moved from that sort of coordinator title to CDO title. So what are your thoughts on the role, Ed?
Yeah, some excellent points that Adita put forth there. You know, I've seen and developed this position from kind of pretty much a ground, you know, white piece of paper, which was a great opportunity. I think the biggest thing that a CDO has to be able to do is evangelize the program, because it is relatively new to government. And so you need to be having that enthusiasm. You need to be able to have those excellent communication skills, and also the capability to build relationships. And I'm, you know, we work over 100 different agencies in Texas. So having the ability to interact with a law enforcement agency versus the health agency takes different skills. So you've got to be able to have those skill sets to be able to work with people. And also, you know, I think that the role changes a little bit. You know, from the early time, it was a lot of building, right? It was a lot of organizing and kind of selling the old concepts of what is good data management practices. Now we have become more of a center of excellence. We work directly with data officers who are being hired, and we're hoping in this upcoming session to get legislation around the agency data management officer, you know, responsibility. But the agencies are starting to hire those positions right now, and I'm actually sitting on interview panels for agencies to hire those data officers. So I've become a kind of an internal consultant advisor to agencies who are looking to establish their program within their specific agency. We provide resources, we provide tools, documentation, best practices, and we also are there as a counsel. So I think in this position now, what I'm doing is looking to expand the program to offer up a variety of different things in addition to literacy and training to help individuals be ready to launch their programs.
Oh, that's great. And so, Rachel, one of the things that makes you a little unique on this panel is that you work out of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, which is a similar agency as I worked out of as a CDO in Connecticut. So I wonder if maybe you have a different set of thoughts, or maybe you're well aligned with our other group.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, and I'm grateful that you work in a similar office to me because it gives me a little bit of credit. So, and I have a lot of respect for Ed and Adita, as my mentors, because it is, I got into this situation where I was asked to work on an enterprise interagency data sharing project before I even had the title CDO. And I was like, where's the legislation to help us do this? Where's like the MOU templates and the facilitation and the person who will tell me how we'll fund this? And then I realized that's actually the chair I'm sitting in. I'm in the governor's office of management and budget. And to Adita's great point, she said we bridge the gap between IT and operations. Well, I sit, on the management side of the office where we're steeped in improving the operations of our state, really understanding how our performance works and applying strategies to improve our outcomes. And often that involves data and technology. And then on the other side of the office, there's the budget, which technology and budget are inextricable. You really shouldn't do one without, you shouldn't do technology without an idea of your budget. And so it became just sort of the right place and the right time to lend our focus to this resource gap. And that's what we've been focused on. So it's sort of been a learning experience, but it's been incredibly eye-opening to, see what other states are doing and say, well, we need that too here in Utah. We need those MOU templates and the legislation, and the data existed well before any of us did. So our role, I think, is really quite reactive in terms of now that the Wild West, is out there. How can we sort of tame the horse a little bit and make it interoperable and really render those insights that people need.
Thanks, Rachel. Now I'm gonna keep this one with you, but we'll get the others involved as well. So I suspect generally that in your role as CDO, and I know that the focus of our work at the Beeck Center is that we're really trying to leverage data for public good and improve, ultimately improve people's lives. And so we'll start with you, Rachel. Could you maybe describe some of your own experiences, the successes, or even the challenges with using data to drive change or serve a public need, which has been, I think, highlighted, especially in states as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the main thing that I've been focused on in sort of my first year in this role was focused on interagency data sharing around case management. We have a lot of different social service programs in the state, and that's been the one sort of nail it and scale it focus that we've had, was how can we share case management data to the front line so that when frontline workers share clients, they can see what that client has going on, if that client's been with the state or is currently. And so typically a really hard project to start with because it's so federally regulated, that data. But something I learned was that if I tell the attorneys what I want and I have to write it down and not wait for them to figure out what I want, if we have client consent, you can overcome any regulatory barriers. And so it was a really good learning opportunity through that sort of tough start. Now we're scaling it, and we're really proud of the ability to do that and have laid that foundation right during the middle of COVID when people need that coordination so much.
Absolutely. We'll go with you, Ed. Some thoughts on this?
Yeah, the activities all around the COVID response have been challenging. I think I might have talked about this in a previous webinar, but our agency, our health agency responsible for managing the record keeping and reporting of this, we're never used to the volume and of activity associated with this. and realistically, the systems and applications they had, although they were scheduled for upgrades, they needed to be done immediately. So a lot of the work around the COVID activity was making sure we could upgrade and get things in place so that we can be able to address the needs, both from a reporting perspective at the governor's office and for the citizens, so be able to identify different things that they need, whether it be a vaccination site or now or a testing site, what have you. So we were, again, trying to be able to provide those centralized resources for the community, whether they be helpful hints around cybersecurity. As we know, bad actors in cybersecurity take advantage of difficult times in human life, right? Whether it be a tornado or with fraudulent insurance adjusters or what have you. But they're also out there looking at these situations around whether it be your stimulus check or what have you. So our office helped provide guidance and documentation to be essentially around multiple areas. One was procurement. How can we expedite the procurement process to be able to get things in people's hands quicker? We also worked to be able to develop, the capture forms, the input forms for individuals that wanted to volunteer, health professionals that wanted to basically come back and assist throughout the process. So there was a lot of, I'll call it direct items, and then there were indirect items. Taking kind of a little bit of a side street, I guess I'll call it. One of the things that Texas has developed is an application called Texas by Texas. And we think that this is going to be downstream a little bit of a benefit because citizens want to have the engagement with their government similar to they have with an Amazon. They want to be able to have those particular things and get their business done in a quick way, perhaps on a mobile device or what have you. And we have several agencies now that have signed up so that if you basically want to opt in and you can basically then get to your government services through one portal. It's a way for them to be able to interact with government going forward. Now, it's not to your question around the COVID, but we have our licensing and regulation agency involved. We're working with our Department of Motor Vehicles to be involved. It's a one-stop shop for interaction with multiple government entities that you as a citizen may be engaged in. So that's just an example of one of the things that we're working on here in Texas.
That's great. Adita, successes, challenges that you face in Arkansas.
Yeah, let me stick with some of the challenges as Ed started on that topic, and maybe I'll circle back on one or two examples of successes as well. But so when COVID hit us, like February, March, I guess, and about April, May is when Governor Hutchinson really put together a technical advisory board for COVID-19 with 12 members from across the state on it, and I was participating on it from a data perspective. So one of the clear challenges, like Rachel alluded to earlier, was definitely around data sharing. I don't think there was any dearth of ideas of how you could leverage public data and how you could put it to good use, especially in a view of the pandemic and the crisis that we were dealing with. But all of those excellent ideas came down to the point of data sharing. So while we were in an emergency pandemic mode, data sharing was much more easier. But to me, being part of that board, the biggest focus was, how do we continue to do what we're doing now in an emergency mode and keep that going post-emergency? I mean, this is some really cool things that we were able to leverage and get done during the pandemic. Well, let's keep the momentum going. So post-pandemic, we don't have to struggle with the same issues of the governance and the needs around data sharing. So one of the things that we were able to do as part of that board was to come up with sort of that boilerplate language for data sharing amongst all state cabinets. It is nothing more than really coming to more of a consensus between departments to say, okay, we know you want to share data, you're not against it, but what kind of security, privacy, regulatory needs do you have in mind that we could standardize and put together so that the next time we need to share data between departments, how would this process be expedited? So my best friends there were the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the Chief Privacy Officer. And we worked together with them as well as the State Data Governance Steering Committee to come up with some standardized language on how we could deploy data sharing agreement across the 15 cabinets. That is now getting circulated and socialized with the state cabinets to get a sign off. The other thing that really came to the surface was the need for having master data across departments, because I mean, what makes this really unique in the government is that all of these agencies and departments, these are, whether it's education, workforce, criminal justice, you know, whatever that department may be, they are all creating resident and citizen data constantly, right? And they all need to be connected, they all need to be talking. And so when you're talking about getting data together at the time of the pandemic, what is most crucial is the source of data. What is that single source of truth, and how do you know that the lineage of the data, the accessibility of the data, all of that comes into play when you're working in the pandemic. So that's something that has really surfaced up for us, and we're working closely on a project where we could start to sort of create a hub of hub approach where, you know, data that is mastered by maybe health or mastered by DHS, we can start bringing that together to have a more centralized, holistic view of a citizen. So those two challenges probably were the big ones for me. Another highlight that came out of that was that Arkansas did not have an open data portal, like a central landing page for whether it's education data, K through 12 schools that were open, or whether it's childcare data, or you know, just COVID numbers. So we're working on that and setting up an open data portal right now.
That's great, Adita, and I'll sort of follow on the thread that you started there, because you've talked about how you're really passionate about championing cross-sector data sharing. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what that looks like to you, and some of the benefits that come with cross-sector data sharing, maybe outside of the pandemic as well?
Sure. Can y'all still hear me okay? I've got just a little bit of allergies going on. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Yes, Tyler, you're right. I am a huge proponent for championing cross-sector data sharing. And really, I don't think it's just a public sector thing. I think as the role of the CDO is kind of meant to be like sharing and encouraging that cross-sector data sharing, because whether you're in the private sector and you're dealing with like a marketing or a sales team, you still need cross-sector data sharing. And whether you're in the public sector and you're dealing with education and workforce data, you still need cross-sector data sharing, right? And again, you know, coming back to the point I was just raising in your previous question, whether it's education data, whether it's driver's license, tax, workforce, health, criminal justice, I mean, we can go on. All of these different departments and agencies are creating some data, which is all focused on our citizen and our residents, right? I mean, each agency's data has a meaning coming back to each individual citizen. So if you kind of keep the citizen in the center, and if you think about this data in a citizen-centric way, you can see that we have to be able to track, or not track, but be able to see the story of a citizen as they move along from whether it's K through 12 through higher ed to driver's license to workforce. And if you're not able to get an insight into their journey through these different phases of life, you are not able to get a holistic view of that citizen, and you will not be able to provide the right services for them in a more statewide perspective. For each department, I mean, they're managing their data and they're creating their data, that's fine. But when you're looking at it from a statewide perspective, you have to be able to connect and share that data to be able to truly harness that value, right? For example, I mean, if you just look at education and workforce data, if we treat those as two separate systems and you do not share data between education and workforce, we may not have all the insights that we need for effective policy making for, let's say, successful higher education programs and investments. You may not have all the insights you need for higher education outcomes. I mean, let's look at the criminal justice area. Data sharing to match data on our incarcerated population, people who are in prison, with the people, let's say, who are receiving unemployment benefits or Medicaid benefits. I mean, that's going to help us identify their eligibility to ensure that they're actually eligible to receive those benefits, right? I mean, all of these use cases, I think, are linked. All of these are meant so that they can help the state save taxpayer dollars through data sharing. I mean, I can keep going on and on, but I really think that with cross-sector data sharing is the only way you can really realign public policy, fine-tune programs, guide policy for economic development. I mean, I can keep going on, but my point is that public sector data sharing is more important than ever before today. And don't get me wrong, I think we are sharing data, but there's always so much more we can do. And that's the point I want to keep making again and again every time we talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the critical issue is like we have the ability to answer these really challenging questions by sharing data across agencies. So Ed, I want to kind of go to you. You've estimated, I think it was in 2019, that downloads from the Texas data portal saved the state about $5 million, maybe a little bit more in opportunity cost. And that was during your time as a data coordinator. Can you maybe touch on some of the progress that you've built on while serving as a CDO, and maybe a little bit of advice that you might have for some states or cities working to improve their open data portals?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So, the Open Data Portal program within our Texas Data Management Program is its own kind of entity. It's the product that we offer free of charge to our agencies to participate in. So you would think that, the free of charge, you'd get people flooding to you, but essentially you have to go out there and work the group, talk about the value propositions associated with it. And the number that you cited there, 5 million around downloads, what we have done is a very conservative approach. We take the total number of downloads on the domain, we have a calculation, and it's very, very, generic, 3 hours per public information request, an average salary of one employee of $45,000 gets to kind of a run rate of $70 per hour. Well, I've done kind of a 50% of the total downloads, a 30%, and then a 10%, because I don't want to overshoot or basically state what basically the potential opportunity cost savings are. And that was great. I mean, if you look at it today, I'm actually have a board of directors meeting tomorrow. We have 13 customers now, active customers, but we have 10 active customers that are actually right now going through the onboarding process, including the Department of State Health Services, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the Department of Transportation, so as well as others. But those three are large organizations, and they're going to start using the Open Data Portal to push more and more information out there. So as we get, again, more individuals, more agencies joining us, our ability to kind of showcase the value proposition is going to be and continues to be very important. But the one thing is we can do it at the domain level. When you talk about some things that we have done, we are worked with our vendor partner now to be able to isolate down to the publishing agency their assets that are published. And then doing that formula again, we have created an agency's executive dashboard. And this is a very high level picture that we want to share with executives to show them, hey, the assets that you put out here, if you use the 50-30-10 number, then you can effectively recognize these types of opportunity costs. But because we've also separated the publishing agency, we can customize that formula. So we know that there is no more than one person that fulfills public information requests. We also know they're mostly the legal department and the IT department, whose salary is much more than $45,000 a year. So if you would look at like the Department of Agriculture, we can customize all the calculations to give their executive director a clearer picture of what those opportunity costs are. We've also done an Open Data Portal resource guide, which is a great book we give to our customers and our prospective customers, teaching them what is open data, giving them examples, helping them with the publishing process. So that document has been leveraged quite a bit, particularly with our newer customers going forward. So we see some great opportunity and growth in this area. And again, it always gets down to, my only advice I think would be is just don't put the data out there. Encourage your publishing agencies to use good open data governance practices. One of our customers found that, they had over 300 assets out there, and a lot of the information was duplicative. So they basically went and through open governance, open data governance, they cleaned it out and present now about 170 assets that are more specific, more important to their constituents to which they serve. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here in an open data portal. It's just continuing to communicate the value and offering up those tools for leadership within an agency to understand what the value actually is. So.
Yeah, that's great, Ed. And I think like some of the early days of open data, I think we were a little more obsessed with like the number of data sets that were being made available versus the quality of some of it that's getting put out there. There was sort of a race to get a good number. And so speaking of measuring things that matter, Rachel, part of your role includes working with agencies and their leadership and their data practitioners to measure what matters. In a time where we collect so much data and can use that to just measure so many different things, how do you work with them to sort of figure out what actually matters?
Well, I appreciate that question so much, and I think I saw a question in the Q&A too about the success framework. So I'll speak to both. The success framework was an operational excellence framework that was the brainchild of my former boss, our former executive director here, Kristen Cox. And she in particular had a great philosophy around data, and that really leads us to measuring what matters. She reminded us all that data is so seductive. Anytime there's a problem, well, we got to have some data. Data isn't quite information, and even once it's information, if we can get to that point where it's insights, sometimes it doesn't quite help us know how to solve the problem. And something I learned from Kristen Cox was that, data, she would go, data says the sky is blue, the grass is green. It describes what's around us, but doesn't necessarily tell us what we should do as a result. And so we help agencies really ask those hard questions. What is your goal? Where are you striving for? And then, what are your main throughputs and outputs and, measures of quality that help you know, more than just a lagging measure like recidivism. How do you know right now in your process whether your operations are working? So that's been a big focus of ours. And I'll say, in addition, just in case any of our friends in Utah are on the call, with this transition that we've had in governors just recently, this is a great opportunity for us to get together with the legislature, with our 2 auditors offices in the state and our office, and really come together around a universal performance measure framework so that our agencies are not beholden to their own internal KPIs and ones that the legislature wants them to have, and then maybe our offices. The way that we structure our performance measures has to be united, otherwise they don't have meaning. So that's a big focus for us now.
Great. So since you picked up on an audience question, we've got a few streaming in. So I'm gonna move over to a few of those for the time being. And this is actually a question that I get a lot in sort of my current role, but also when I was in Connecticut. And basically as CDOs, I'm gonna maybe rephrase the question a little bit, but the question is essentially how or do you work with cities and local governments in your state? And beyond that, maybe what maybe should be should that relationship be like? And I'll start with you, Ed.
Great. I love that question. I think one of the things I've tried to do in my role is to step, not just within state agencies, but to involve institutions of higher education. But the local government in the cities, I'm a big proponent of working closely with. We have a relationship with the city of Austin and the city of Dallas, where we have federated our open data portals. And we share lots of information between the three of us. I participate with the city of Austin in briefings on their side. They participate on mine. We both share back and collaborate information. I think it's extremely important. I've always talked about developing a data ecosystem that is inclusive of all data that serves the citizen. So whether it's at the county level, whether it's at the ISD level, whether it's at the state level, it's important to be able to kind of have that, because we're not all experts. We don't have all the answers. So I've always looked for other individuals, and actually from the cities, sometimes you get some very creative ideas. They are much closer to their constituent than sometimes the state is, because those individuals are extremely interested in handling the community challenge of the city, whatever it may be. It could be road repair or homelessness or what have you. But they have a way of working directly with the customer, the consumer, and they provide updates directly to them so that they can shape and develop and mold their programs. I like to get to that point. However, being with over 100 agencies and another 50 higher education, we just don't have the bandwidth or the resources to reach out in those ways to be able to get that input from the citizens. So, but I do share information. We do share our training. We just recently have completed a data governance training module, and I'll be sharing that with the city of Austin and Dallas, so that they can be able to take part of the literacy training that we've developed. It's not, and it shouldn't be bundled up just at the state level. For those of you who know me, I'm a huge proponent of sharing everything I create, because I personally believe that if I can share a document or a thought or idea or something, when it's time that I need some assistance and help, people are definitely willing to work with me on the other side of it. So that's I guess would be the best thing as far as working with the cities and groups and at the local government level.
That's great. Rachel or Adita, thoughts on that, or we can move on to other questions if you'd like.
Yeah, I can have a quick follow-up on that, Tyler. I think let me just start off by saying that I think there is so much more value that we can create together if we are working more closely with our local communities, like Ed said, because they're often so much more closer to some of the problems that different areas are facing and our citizens are facing. So the more we can work closer together, I think it's to the benefit of the broader audience. But maybe I can give a quick example of kind of to showcase how we've worked towards some data sharing in different communities. So our General Assembly had passed a Criminal Justice Reinvestment and Efficiency Act a couple of years ago to kind of enable us to find a more data-driven approach to help the problem of recidivism in Arkansas. And for those who are not familiar with recidivism, what that means is a citizen pretty much returning back to the criminal justice system. And one of the key deliverables from that legislation was the creation of crisis stabilization units. And the purpose was that we create these crisis stabilization units, which I'm going to refer to as CSU, as a jail diversion program to provide alternatives for those who were in mental health crisis and were coming in contact with law enforcement. So the idea was that, people who were going into the jails for petty crimes were getting into this vicious cycle of coming in and out of the jail system while they were in mental health crisis. And of course, the jails are not the right place for them because jails are not equipped to handle people with mental health crisis. They need special care. So if they don't get that special care, they're going to come back into the jail system making our recidivism rates go higher and higher. So today, with a huge data sharing initiative and with Governor Hutchinson's support, there are 4 operational CSUs in the state to assist people with mental health crisis. And I want to bring up that use case because I think if you pause and kind of think at the scope of that, it's really mind-blowing to think the power of data here. We are talking about data sharing and data collaboration at so many different levels here. It's not only within state departments, it's not just the health and the criminal justice departments, but it's also between state and county government. It's about criminal justice systems in different levels in the government. It's about law enforcement. It's about the hospital system. It's about community health providers. So, I mean, to me, that's just such a strong case of showcasing the power of sharing data for actual public good. And I mean, this is an issue not just for Arkansas. I think it's an issue for so many other states of seeing this problem of recidivism. So I think I just kind of wanted to highlight that, you know, there's so much that's being done today, but there's so much more to do.
That's great. Thanks, Adita. And we had a great question come in through Q&A, so I'll start with Rachel, but I'd love to hear from all of you around this. But the question was about evangelism, and what are some of the keywords or phrases or just approaches you all take to evangelize the benefits of data sharing, especially as opposed to maybe the cost to data privacy or other you know, sometimes in government, we tend to be so risk averse and afraid of something that it can be hard to get people excited about sharing data. So I'm curious what all your approaches are. We'll start with you, Rachel.
Thanks. That is an excellent question. That's the bread and butter of this work. You know, Ed said earlier that so much of this is just coordinating, and I really think that maybe we should you know, maybe give a nickname to this chief data officer title. It's really like chief diplomat sometimes. So you are evangelizing all day. And one of the words I use like 100 times a day is interoperability. This is really not just about research. It's not an academic exercise. This is about helping government work together with itself. We ask our citizens to get their lives together, you know, to do better, especially in the case management format. And we're there to support, but we got to get ourselves together too. Asking people to navigate our bureaucracy is a tall order in the situations that people are in. So interoperability, and then to that point, you know, I spend a bit of time making sure that we've talked to citizens. This data realm is not so different from like user experience and the citizen experience, and talking to citizens about what they want and what the front line needs to do their jobs is usually my greatest point of persuasion in telling people, and especially the attorneys, why we need to do what we're going to do.
Ed, what's your approach?
Well, you know, I just want to hit on a word that Rachel just said. It's why. Why do we do this? Why do we need to do this? And I think starting with the why rather than the how and the what, getting to a perspective of, you know, the reason we're doing this, why we're doing this is to be able to help this group of citizens, to help expedite this process, to do this, to do that, whatever. It reminded me of something I did very early on between one of our veteran groups and our Health and Human Services regarding access to 211 data that came in from veterans. There was a time lag. They weren't getting a direct access feed. The manager of the health group didn't want to share, felt there was some concerns on that. And we sat down and really just kind of, you know, talked about it. And I said, who are we serving? Why are we doing this? You know, a veteran calls in and needs financial assistance. They can't wait a month for an organization to reach out to them. So if this group in the veterans group could have data more accessible, they could be able to turn and address that need in a quicker fashion. So, and after pointing all that out, the director over at the health group said, finally, I get it, I understand it, and I'm going to make it happen. So we did make it happen. But it's just a matter of really sitting down and discussing the importance of the why are we going to do this. Now, there's always challenge with, okay, well, how are we going to protect the data and who's going to see it and what do we need to redact and all those pieces and components. But I think real importantly, we need to get to an agreement that as agencies, even though we're all different and unique and have our own mission, we all serve the common good of the customer, which is the citizen. So let's try to work together to be able to make it easier. Rachel mentioned bureaucracy. Well, true. We've got so much bureaucracy. I mean, every agency has its own level of bureaucracy. So you have to kind of work through all of that as well as you go through it. But the terms, interoperability is an excellent term. I think, what I always stress again is the why for the customer, the ultimate end consumer or the need of the service. And I also try to inspire upon them the kind of a sense of let's do good, right? Let's have a sense of good in the way that we do it. So that's kind of my thought.
Thanks, Ed. And you touched on something that's sort of teeing up our next question that came in. So as data officers, this is often I don't know if controversial is the right way to frame it, but it's another question that comes up because a lot of this discussion is around data sharing. So I'll start with you, Adita, but what is your role, or maybe even what should your role be in terms of protecting data as it's being shared, both maybe within departments or even across sectors?
Yeah, and I was just going to pick on what Ed was talking earlier, so this is a really good segue into this question. It's all about eventually data for good, and that's the motto that I try to live by. We are public servants. We are here to be able to leverage public, citizen, resident data, however you want to call it, to be able to use it for the best services for the citizen, right? Now, there's a very thin line in how to balance that with privacy. Yes, and I agree to that. And so as our role as data leaders, I feel like I have taken a shift into being very careful about the specific data that I'm asking for from other departments when we talk about data sharing. I don't want all of your data. There's no reason to give me all of it. Give me only these specifics because I'm going to use it for this specific purpose, right? It has to come down to a very specific need. And also what helps in the equation is what's in it for me for every department that you're asking data for, right? It's about public good, and that public good should extend to all parties, right? So having the approach of not asking for everything, asking for only the specifics, and having a strong governance approach on top of all of these data sharing agreements is absolutely critical, because laying down the governance on who's gonna get access to that data, how's it gonna be secured, how are we gonna continue to maintain the data we receive commensurate to the regulations that are surrounding it. I mean, that is utmost critical when you're asking somebody else to give or share their data, right? So I think having that mindset to first instill the idea of data for good. This is public data. We're trying to send it back, use it for public good, back to the citizen, connecting it back to the citizen, and then just asking only specifically what you need and paying attention to the governance policies. I think that together is the right recipe. Of course, if you have a chief privacy officer or a chief security officer, and I don't know that all states have one, but if you do, I work closely with them to ensure that anything that we're getting access to goes to the right compliance and the regulatory needs, and pretty much stick to don't ask for identified data if you don't need it. In some cases, that is necessary to do the basic integration and the matching. Well, you integrate, you match, but does everything need that identified data? Probably not. You can do a lot with the identified and aggregated data. So start small with what you're asking, show value, and build that trust and build that culture. So I think culture plays a huge role in this as well.
Rachel, I'd love to get your thoughts on the privacy issue as a CDO that sits outside the IT agency.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tyler. And I'm, not the only personnel in data around, in the state. Like I said, the data existed before we had these roles or came along. And we do have a great Chief Information Security Officer who has a great framework for that. We also make sure that we're on platforms that are encrypted. We make sure that our APIs are end-to-end encrypted. We really do trust in the great personnel that we have on the IT side to take care of that. Again, returning to what Adita said earlier, our role is really to bridge the gap between IT and operations. And so we rely on both sides to tell us what's what. But we definitely make sure, in terms of audit trails and access, that we are giving only the very minimal amount of data that's needed to do the job.
Great. Ed, we'll kind of pose the same question to you as well around your role or maybe what you perceive a CDO role to be related to privacy.
Yeah, so, in Texas, we're a little bit structured a little differently. I mean, it's a decentralized government model. Every agency has its kind of own mission charter. And from our end of it, we don't have a statewide chief privacy officer. What we have done, though, is we've identified and developed in working with a variety of different legal counsels from different agencies, a data sharing compact. This uniform memorandum of understanding allows agencies to sign off on the first part of it, which is, I'll call it the terms and conditions, the basics of what a data sharing agreement is. And then there's a scope of information document or addendum to it. That's where agency program areas can really get into the discussion about data and the privacy associated with the different pieces of it and how it should be handled, how it should be managed, and all of that. So we've expedited the process through this product and allowed agencies to really get into the details. Agencies know the importance of their data. If you're working in law enforcement, you're dealing with sieges. If you're in the TEA, it's education agency, you're dealing with FERPA data. If you're in health, you're in HIPAA data. It's like we don't have to tell them how to deal with the privacy associated with their data. What we, again, try to do is facilitate a process that helps expedite a more efficient way for agencies to share information by using that data sharing compact. There's also I just want to touch about this. I've been thinking about the fact that, if you think about, all the people that deal with the strategic asset, right? You have your data security people that do the practices of good data security. You have the data managers, the CDOs that work on the data elements of master data management, all the other pieces to it. You have the privacy officer or general counsel in our situation who has, state and federal, responsibilities to advocate for protecting consumer or citizen things. And then you have records managers, right, who are handling with the back end of the life cycle and the front end of the life cycle from a classification perspective. I really have thought that in Texas, what I'd like to do is establish a strategic asset council, someone that is made up of these 4 focus subject matter areas that can be able to share information. Because what do we have in common? Well, we have things in common like policy, we have standards, we may use different things like NIST or DAMA or what have you, but we also have training, right? And ensuring common literacy across the board for all of our disciplines. So I just actually launched this right now live, a strategic asset council. Haven't got it approved yet. But anyways, I think it's a way for us to be able to build that relationship and that partnering between the areas of expertise. The question that came and I answered it was, what's the working relationship I have with the state archives and records management? And in Texas, we have a really good relationship. I talk with those people all the time. We work hand in glove when it comes to the legislature on a number of things related to the data side.
Awesome, thanks, Ed. And so, and sort of, I'll keep going with you here. We have a couple minutes left. You already gave us like your own personal preference of what the future may look like. And each of you maybe just spend a minute. I'll start with Ed. You know, maybe what do you think the next 3 to 5 years holds for CDOs? What new or changes do you see on the horizon?
Well, I see the next 3 to 5 years, I think there's going to be a greater emphasis on privacy. I think that's certainly going to be one that we all are going to have to take a closer focus on. I think there's a way for us to do, again, more interoperability, to be able to continue to increase data sharing. And, you know, and the other thing is to look at ways of the common topic. So, you know, fraud detection is a perfect example. Multiple agencies address fraud within their tower of mission, but we don't share case file information very well. And if we did, it might open up opportunities to identify where there is similar trends or individuals that are trying to defraud the government in multiple places. So I think the more of those types of use cases where we can generate some hard results, numbers, and efficiencies, I think those will be the future of what a CDO is going to be asked to do in pushing forward with the whole thing. So
great. Adita, the future in the next 3 to 5 years in your opinion?
Yeah, I agree with Ed. I think we're going to continue to see a more strategic focus on security and privacy, but still continuing to evangelize data for good as a purpose, because I think that is the essence of us as public servants and CDOs in this space, to continue to leverage data and turn it into actionable intelligence for data for good. I also see probably a higher or greater shift in working as a key technologist to kind of help with AI and ML adoption and application. I mean, AI is here to stay. You know, it has its own benefits. It also has its own risks with it. And I see that the CDO will be probably working closely to kind of figure out how well to help with AI adoption, innovation. Kind of, you know, we should be all in positions where we can continue to take risks and continue to, you know, see how technology can help our day-to-day problems for the citizens, right? So I kind of see that we will probably be getting more and more involved in that space if we aren't already.
And Rachel.
Well, I am so excited these next 4 years, you know, with a new governor and a lot of spring in our step, where we just have every opportunity to make good on these next 4 years. And I think what that means for Utah and what that also means for other states and CDOs is that we return ownership and voice in terms of our data that we have to the citizens, to our constituents. I think that will incredibly help our situation and identity resolution, right? All of our data about this constituents is sort of scattered. You know, people don't trust the government. They think that we're watching you and that we know you and we've connected all your dots. We haven't. Very far from that. And but I think as we start to do some more of that interoperability, it's just going to be a better impetus to give the voice back to the constituent and say, where do you want to share, and give them ownership so that they can see, kind of like Ed said, in a single sign-on one-stop shop. So I see a lot of that. And I would just say technology is the easy part for us going forward. Technology makes it really easy to do what we have to do, and our opportunities and challenges really exist in the diplomacy and the problems on the front line. So I'm excited to dive into those with everyone.
Great. And so with our last minute here, really quick, what's one thing each of you would like attendees to take away from today's session? And I'll start with you, Ed.
Opportunity. There is lots of opportunity in this field. You just need to find it, and you need to basically get innovative. think about different ways to be able to offer up the services in which your office provides.
Great. Adita.
I'd say, the opportunities are a lot, like Ed said. I just say, continue to keep the passion for your organizational data. Whichever department you're sitting at, be sure that you understand that organization's data and convert that passion to leverage and create value for the citizens, because that's what our positions are for, and that's what our data leadership should be about. Also, take the time to listen and engage with your users, your customers, your stakeholders, and then align your data strategy to achieve the right results for them.
Great. And Rachel will give you the last word.
My last word is inclusion. I think it's so important that we open our ears to as many people as possible as we're working on these sensitive issues. And that's what I hope to do better of this year.
That's amazing. Thank you all so much. I'll turn it back over to Marissa.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you, of course, to our wonderful panelists. I think I speak for the audience when I say that was just amazing. So many great takeaways. So thank you again, Tyler. Thank you, Rachel, Ed, Adita. And of course, thank you all who tuned in. We appreciate you, and we hope you came away with some great takeaways as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.